Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to deal with Gabby Petito rumor control, such as sandals spotted outside the van, Gabby's phone left on a rock outside the van, someone digging, opposite the van in terms of the red and white, is it Bethune footage? And then also Brian Laundrie left a note on a vehicle, Brian Laundrie picked up by a hitchhiker, and then the conspiracy theory, the whole thing was a scheme to set up their channel. We're going to be investigating all of these observations, rumors, and so on. So we're going to examine 7 separate claims that have arisen during a time of peaking interest and uncertainty in the Gabby Petito case. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So we're starting off with sandals in the gravel, and I'll put a link to the footage in the description. At 1 minute 49 in the red, white, and Bethune footage, you can clearly see the grey silhouette of a flip-flop immediately below the ladder. I did wonder whether that was photoshopped or something. In other words, you wouldn't see it in the original footage, but sure enough, you do see it in the original footage. If you look closer, right below the black ladder, you see a flip-flop. And this does correspond to the sort of footwear Gabby wore, including during the Moab incident. This shoe lying out in the open does suggest that someone was possibly still preoccupied with her disposal and perhaps still going through the process of disposal and covering up when Kyle and Jen rumbled by, capturing the footage on their GoPro because they'd apparently forgotten to turn it off that day. So the TCRS verdict is that this is a valid and useful discovery, but it could also be Brian's flip-flop, and he may have left it outside perhaps because it was smelling. Perhaps he was sleeping inside at the time. Everything was sort of completed at that point, or something like that, and it was actually his flip-flop, because we can also see from the body cam footage that that is the kind of footwear he wore. That brings us to the second point, Gabby's phone perched on a rock. Obviously, the moment you see the abandoned flip-flop, the imagination tends to switch on. A number of opportunistic content creators have been happy to satisfy the demand for answers, including by suggesting that Gabby's phone is lying on a rock behind the flip-flop. It could be a phone, but it's also perfectly plausible that there's a grey phone-shaped rock in a sea of grey rectangular rocks, right? It's not clear. So I'm not convinced anyone would purposefully put a phone on the ground on a rock, and if it fell, I think it's unlikely. You might think, well, perhaps Brian did that, but Brian probably needed that phone, or possibly needed that phone to send messages beyond that date, right? So he would need to take care of the phone. So I'm not convinced that that's the phone, and if it fell, I don't think it's likely that it would land in that position. We also don't have any images to cross-reference the phone photo as we did with the sandals. For all we know, Gabby may have had a bright pink or luminous green or cream-colored phone, and that phone looks sort of dark or grey. So the TCRS verdict, it's too close to call with certainty, but it's probably not Gabby's phone. That brings us to the third point. Is that someone digging in the background? This one is fairly easy and straightforward to debunk. First of all, the area highlighted in the recovery footage has a fair amount of tree cover immediately adjacent to the surrounding the disposal site. One wonders if there was any camping that took place in that sort of area. The phantom digger is out in the open in this scenario. The other thing is, no one would dig or dispose of someone in clear open terrain in broad daylight, especially if they had the alternative of a covered forested area, which they did. Finally, if you look at the original footage carefully, if you look at 1 minute 43 seconds, it doesn't look like a digger or a person. But to suggest that tricks the imagination into seeing that especially given the context we're in now, with serious, urgent questions and no clear answers right now. So you can kind of, someone taking someone else's word for it, and that happens a lot on social media. Social media happily tries to fill that vacuum, but is it credible? So the TCRS verdict on this question, debunked. Then 4 and 5 are fairly simple and easy to establish. Brian Laundrie left a note on a vehicle, TCRS verdict true. You can go to a link in the description to get the news report on that. And then also a TikToker, Miranda Baker, claims Brian hitchhiked a ride with her. The TCRS verdict, it's probably true. We don't know that for a fact, but it does seem to tick all the boxes, the date, the area, and the kind of dude that Brian was. I do think it's quite odd that he offered her $200. If the story is true, one wonders what that was all about. Was he trying to establish an alibi? Was it a sense that he'd been locked out of the vehicle, and then later on he got the vehicle back, but he didn't know where she was? I don't know. And then let's go on to the 6th point. Gabby and Brian staged the whole thing to set up their channel. During last night's live, I quoted Ernest Becker saying, "We don't want to admit we are fundamentally dishonest about reality." It's because of this that content creators can make a lot of treasure based on conning people, misleading them, because people want to imagine things that are easy to believe yet unlikely. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily unlikely, but it tends to dismiss all the dynamics that we've seen. It tends to rubbish the Moab incident. And so, are you going to be cynical enough to say that was all contrived, that was a performance, that was all acted, that the tears weren't real? I don't think so. So, people want quick and easy answers, even if they're not sensible or logical. And I think some of this has to do with our own efforts to deal with anxiety. Not knowing something that matters to us leads to feelings of uncertainty and anxiety. So getting a quick answer helps to soothe us into believing we have some control when we don't. The illusion of knowledge isn't knowledge, it's the illusion of control. It's still an illusion. People need the illusion of control in order to feel safer and less anxious about a given situation. I must also say that I definitely thought about that possibility myself, and I think that it is right that you think about it. But I think what one's got to be careful of is, don't be emotional and sensational about something when you're trying to figure something out, because that helps people to believe the most ridiculous things. It's when we're unemotional and in control of anxiety that we tend to see the unpleasant truth for what it is. So the TCRS verdict on this, I think, is obviously a lot clearer now than before the press conference. Anyway, the TCRS verdict is, in the words of Jerry Maguire, we live in a cynical world. And then number 7, Gabby's remains were found by scavengers. I got into a discussion with someone on Twitter about predation in the area and a lot of wild animals. It's probably worth thinking about. I think that kind of speculation is to be expected, but we are going to be provided with clear answers on this question when the coroner's report is complete. And there's an image of the coroner's van leaving the area. The TCRS verdict on this is be patient. Facts and answers are coming soon. We'll know when the coroner's report comes out, exactly what is going on. I'm kind of a bit hesitant to say this, but based on the article on CNN where they talk about photographs and DNA, there seems to be a certain degree of uncertainty whether it is Gabby, and I think that does add some support to this idea of wild animals. I'm not going to say anything further than that. So I'll put a link to the CNN article as well. In conclusion, in my opinion, only 3 of these rumors are really worth pursuing: the sandal and what it means, the hitchhiking episode and what it reveals about the timeline and Brian's movements after the 27th, and then Brian's note left on the vehicle. I'd be interested to know what the officers involved in the Moab incident have to say about the way they handled the situation now, and perhaps how they feel about it now that we know what happened to Gabby. The Moab incident was an incredible opportunity for a reality check for Gabby and Brian. I mean that as, individually and as a couple. Instead, it ended up putting, I think, the blame on the victim and perhaps aggravating the dynamics that were already in play, and that's really unfortunate. In the next few episodes, we're going to examine the Moab incident footage, as well as Brian's sermon near the gate. That's the gate to the Arches National Park. And with the benefit of hindsight, we want to see what the officers missed. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.